Baby, CreepTime the podcast is going on tour and coming to a city near you.
So head over to creeptime.com to get your tickets to come see CreepTime live.
Well, you can't trust County.
Well, welcome back, baby. Creepers, we had a little technical difficulty, so we're running through this case. Round two.
Round two, baby. What I previously went
baby.
into blind, I am no longer blind reacting.
Yeah, I was going to say. But you know what is really funny is the second we got off, I was like, damn, that theory was tight. You came up
The one
with.
that and I'll reiterate it too.
I know. So you're going to need to reiterate
We'll come back around to that one.
But literally, we could have stopped the recording there if that is where it stopped. And we could have been like, and that's it. That's the theory.
I try my best. You give me the kernels and I'm like, all right, well, let's map up how this could have actually happened in a timeline. But I'm excited for us to run through it again. I'm excited that we're back on with the Creepers.
We're back on with the Creepers. And Creepers, today's case actually takes place across the pond in London, which I know we just covered. Trevor Dealey that was Ireland, though.
It was Dublin.
So we're back across the pond in a case that revolves around the initial disappearance of a woman in the 1980s who experienced what is every corporate or working woman's worst nightmare, in my opinion. Have you ever heard of the case? Well, now you have. Of Susie Lampl.
Never. Oh my God. Wow.
Oh my God. Actually, this is a good exercise for me to go off script a little bit. I'm an improv. I'm gonna do my thing. But yeah.
Imagine I hit all the same beats as the previous recording. Creepers, I'm sorry. Maybe Riverside will recover it at one day. And we'll add it as like in the lost archive of media for Creep Time. But we truly were at like the tail end of the case. And then for context, bounced back to the recording. And I was like, why is this not recording? And I thought it was my error. But then come to find out it did record, but like the file was corrupt or something. Anyway.
Baby, county corruption at its finest. No, but this is fun because it's like the Creepers get it's a little behind the curtain moment here. But so we're going to go over the case of Susie Lampl. And I think as we dive deeper, I know that you've already been exposed to it, but you and the Creepers are going to see how just sinister this really becomes because it's not just about Susie. It unravels and connects to a string of other female disappearances within the London area at that time. Just a little bit of context. Susie Lampl was a young working woman. She was actually a real estate agent who was embarking on what was sure to be a very promising career. But at 25 years old, she had no idea that one client visit during lunchtime would end up being her last. And let me just say, welcome back, Creepers. And especially if you are new here, we're so excited to have you. We were talking the first time we recorded this just about how many new listeners we have. And we're so excited the amount of you that are, I've just seen in the comments and stuff, like just found you guys, like loving the podcast. So if you are new here, there's a lot of lore. There's a lot of inside jokes that I'm sure you'll become familiar with. But our goal is to bring you some real well done research on some unsolved cases, on some paranormal stories that we cover, survival stories, and so much more. So if you are new, please go ahead and follow us on Apple, Spotify, or hit the bell notification so you don't miss any new episodes. And also, if you like this episode, go ahead and leave us a review or comment on Spotify, because Spotify for creators has really kind of updated their comment section. So we can really interact with you guys. We can like things, we can reply. So make sure you get over there and interact with us, because it really, it's fun for us. And I think it helps the podcast grow because you can see what other people are saying about the show and give us case suggestions. It's awesome. We really enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I just want to say, if you are also new, I'm Stu. If that's not clear, this is Silas Dean.
I never realized that, but it actually may not be clear.
I know.
to some
I was
people.
just thinking that. I was like,
I've
wait.
never thought about that.
Well, also, backstory, the time that you and I did live news and they thought that you were, who they think I was, Steve?
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
It wasn't even that they just swapped our names, thinking that we were like the opposite people. I think they swapped us with the opposite guests. Like it was an entirely different group that was coming on for the show.
Yes, exactly. And like 5 seconds before we were about to go live, they said, all right, Steve. And I was like, wait, I'm actually not Steve. So yeah, if you're new, I'm Stu and this is Silas Dean. And we're so happy you're here. And if you are coming to see us on tour, we also just want to give a huge shout out to you guys. We're so excited to see you as it gets closer and closer. Like we
Yeah.
cannot believe this. I don't know what the countdown is right now, but it's probably less than 40 days.
It definitely is less than 40 days. I'd say we're like roughly just a little over a month out from where tour starts. And that is when the first show is going to kick off in Los Angeles on March 1st.
Los Angeles, home of Silas Dean. So yeah, if you haven't gotten your tickets yet and you want to come see us on the West Coast, please go ahead and do so at creeptime.com, or you can request your city so that eventually, baby, we can make our way across the country and come see you in your town. And what else, baby? I think with that, I'm ready
Well,
to
I
launch
was just
us
going to
into the
say,
case.
well, just because you mentioned that some people are new, for anybody who doesn't know whether they're new listeners or longtime listeners, Spotify is now rolling out video podcasts, which, if you didn't know, you can watch us do this podcast, and you can do so on Spotify ad-free. That is for a limited time. I have no idea how long it's going to last, but if you want an uninterrupted experience, come on over to Spotify, try listening and watching Creep Time the podcast.
Yeah. And I know I've said this before, but I love when creepers have us up and they just get to like, it's like watching a talk show, I feel like, because I do that with my podcast too. It's
Maybe
nice
that's
to,
what
like,
this is.
cast.
This is a
Yeah,
low budget talk show, if you haven't noticed. And we're
Hey.
rivaling ratings with Kelly Clarkson at this point.
Who you calling low budge?
Sorry, that divider behind you.
As I'm wearing my like Target slippers and this is all an illusion. Everything that's happening down here is scary. Anyways, so yeah, welcome to the show. And with that, let's go ahead and dive into the case of Susie Lampl.
Okay, I'm ready. I think I'm going to come back to this with a bit of like a little like a bit of a trained eye. Now that we've gone through it once, I've had time to process a little bit, and I think I'm going to be able to hit this even harder.
Yeah, well, you're going to be like true investigator. You've had time. You've had your briefing on the case, your first pass.
That's why I'm excited. I'm like, all right, I feel like I never get this opportunity.
I know. I'm excited for you. Okay. So Susie Lampl was a 25-year-old young woman who was working at Sturgis and Sons Real Estate Agency, which was a pretty prestigious firm with an office that was located at 654 Fulham Road in London's Fulham neighborhood. Now, interestingly, in the 1980s, the housing market in London was hot. And under Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, the economy was apparently booming. So Susie had no shortage of clientele and was responsible for showing a lot of upscale properties to some pretty high-end clients. And it was a good time to be a real estate agent, and especially someone like Susie, who was described as very hardworking, vivacious, and attractive. And actually, I've shared this already with Silas, but Creepers, I will have up a little doc like we normally do. And if you're new here, we usually post to our CreepTime podcast Reddit page. We'll drop a link with some, photos of our victims and if there's any sort of crime scene photos and stuff, so you can follow along. But you can see there from the photos of Susie that I think we mentioned this earlier, but she was very young to be somebody that was kind of in charge of such like high profile clientele and showing these properties. And
it was the first thing I remembered when you had mentioned a brief description of her. I was like, wow, that 25 is very young to be working for a high profile real estate agency.
Yeah. And can you like just describe what she looks like? I mean,
well, that was the first thing I noticed was just her youth, because I was already putting it into context of how she could maybe stick out in an office, or the certain different types of characters that she would have to navigate with through that office, both in and out in terms of clients. But to visually describe her, she's young, she's very pretty. She does have pretty standard features, I would say, sort of dark hair. I can see how she would have been maybe a target for some people in that office, or the ones interacting with that office who might have seen her.
Yeah, actually, just we didn't mention this before. Remember the dark hair thing because that's going to come back around. But yeah, I noticed immediately her definitely she's got this like vivacious, attractive quality to her. But I noticed her smile. I thought she had a very like just she looked like a pretty happy person, a good like demeanor
She
about
does.
her.
She does have a pretty smile.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, she had all these qualities that made her a really likable agent. So she sold lots of homes, so much so that according to some reports, and I would take this as sort of a sign of the times, but the Surgis and Sons firm had a desk that sat more prominently in one of the windows that faced the street.
Hmm.
And it was where you could sort of be on display. And they ended up putting Susie in this office. And I think I've got a picture. I'm not quite sure if it's that corner that you can see in that photo of
Hmm.
Sturgis and Sons, but somewhere right there. So she faced the street as people would pass by. And they know this because Susie actually wrote about it in her journal. She wrote, well, I guess it's good for business and good for me. But it is a little bizarre to basically be the doll in the window display.
Hmm.
But like I said, she wasn't just attractive. She was very hardworking. She was very put together, ambitious young woman, and was very good at what she did. But we'd also come to find some other information in her journal, some information that would be crucial to getting a better understanding of how and why Susie could have vanished. Because someone was paying Susie a little bit of extra special attention. And Susie would write in her journal that a client of hers was starting to become bothersome and a nuisance. And though she never used his name in the journal, she said that he made her uncomfortable and even scared on a couple of
Hmm.
occasions. Which very odd to me that she never actually named him in the journal. She just referred to him as one of her male clients. But she had mentioned him to her mom and she had said, this is happening, and reportedly to some other family members like her uncle. And her mom, whose name was Diana, is going to be a very important figure in this case because she's one of the first people that's contacted once Susie goes missing and helps to kind of piece together what could have possibly happened to her.
Hmm.
But yes, her mom knew that there was this particular client of Susie's that had been on her recently, not taking the hint. And according to Diana, Susie had vocalized that this man would call her office. He had called her home on a couple of occasions. But really, what had made her the most uncomfortable was that one time he had sent her flowers. And I think for Susie, it just started to lean into stalkerish territory. But
Naturally. Yeah.
naturally, remember that this is the 1980s and it was a working woman's world, but it was also sort of a sign of the times where, I hate to say this, but accepting a gift from a man, a lot of women might turn the other cheek and just say thank you. We weren't quite at the level yet where I think women in the workplace might have felt comfortable to report on things, or we just didn't kind of have that um like infrastructure yet. So any initial thoughts from you kind of with that setup?
I think it echoes the same things that I thought the first time around as well. The things that I'm paying very close attention to now, I definitely agree with you that it is a sign of the times, and I think that this still extends to this point in time where
Mhm.
people will often have really complicated dynamics with their clients, and it sounds like that's what this was shaping up to be, where they kind of are your source to the money, they are your commission, and you have to sort of handle them with kid gloves and coddle them. But also, a lot of people know what that experience is, to be at the receiving end of unwanted attention or affection from that client. And it's not as simple and cut and dry as cutting them off. It's usually a complicated relationship, most specifically for women. I
Mhm.
have experienced this in different ways, but I think that this is tenfold for women.
Yeah. I actually was thinking after you had shared that you've experienced it, I'm not sure I've ever aside from the guy that lives in my building that I've discussed a couple of times with you, but it's that same thing of like you got to do this weird dance with them after each interaction where it's like you don't quite know how much further they're going to take it, but especially if it's someone like a client where
Mhm,
they're sort of in a position of power, and then if you're in real estate and you don't know
mhm.
where your next deal is closing, I can just see a world where she might have kind of like kept this close to the chest.
Yeah, well, it's great. It's like relationship building. Actually, I'm thinking of this now, but there's a really good example I could give you, not of mine, but this is somebody I knew from the marketing world, and I will never reveal names here, but their dynamic, because in a sales position, it's all about relationships, and
Hmm.
that's where the line starts to get a little blurred, I think. And you could argue that working in real estate is a sales position in certain ways. It's a very
Yeah.
elevated one, but the dynamic and the relationship building is the same. His scenario was that he was on the sales side. Client, female client, was obviously on the buyer side. And, you take people out for drinks, you take people out for a good time when you're the sales rep. And that's how you build the relationship. That's how you build a little bit of the trust. She had gotten very drunk and was trying to make advances on him. And he's a gay guy. And he talked about how complicated and confusing
Hmm.
that situation was for him in trying to obviously cut that off immediately, but not
Yeah.
trying to like embarrass the person if they're drunk and they're trying to like come on to you. And it just made me think, I was like, there are so many levels about that specific scenario of like a female client, a male
Hmm.
sales rep, he's gay, she's drunk, she's coming on to him, that keep this in this really ambiguous and tumultuous area for the sales rep of like, how do I navigate this to cut that person off?
Yeah.
It illustrated for me how complicated her relationship could have been to this client.
Hmm. But it's the same through line throughout, which is that like that person, the person doing the stalking or the, advancing, they know that what they're doing is wrong. And normally I feel like
Mhm.
in your gut that something is off. Um, so and just in the context of the sign of the times, I hate to think about how deep that had gotten at this point, but we're not quite sure. But imagine her mom knowing this, and then she receives a call one day in July of 1986 from Susie's boss saying, and this is verbatim what he said. He said,
Mhm.
"Do you have any idea where your daughter might be, Mrs. Lamplugh? We wondered whether she could have called into home for lunch. I don't want to worry you, Mrs. Lamplugh, but Susanna left to show a house to a client just before lunch, and she has not returned. We just wanted to check anywhere we could." Now, apparently, Susie was very conscientious. So, obviously, both Susie's manager and her mother knew that something felt off.
Mhm.
It would be very unusual for Susie to not return or just take the rest of the day off without telling anybody. And then it hits Diana. She remembers this person, this man that Susie had vocalized and made her uncomfortable. And something in her gut told her that it probably had to do with this.
Mhm.
So the end of the day rolls around and Susie still hasn't showed up. And Susie's manager ends up calling the police and calls Diana again and says she's still not here. So I've gone ahead and I've called the police. And eventually, an officer arrives at the firm to try to uncover more about Susie's day, her schedule, where she could have possibly gone. And they end up looking at her desk. And thankfully, her planner was sitting right there still. And there it is, a note that has a scribbled name on it that has become infamously synonymous with the case of Susie Lampl. It just said, "Mr. Kipper, 12:45 p.m." The last meeting that she would have taken before lunch and presumably her last appointment ever.
Mhm.
And police asked her manager and other coworkers if they knew of this Mr. Kipper. Did they have any clients with this last name? And no, no one ever heard of him, nor had they heard her talk about a Mr. Kipper. Now, thank God she did this. Susie had actually written down the exact address of where she was meeting him, and her manager let police know that she had taken their company car to make this appointment as well. So we immediately had the make and model of the car to be on the lookout for. And I do think it's a little bit bizarre that no one had ever heard of him. And I don't know how you feel. I guess I just feel that if I had been stalked at work, it might kind of be the thing that I like share with a close coworker. Like, hey, there's this guy, this guy that calls himself Mr. Kipper. I have
Mhm.
to go on an appointment with him. But I don't know how, I mean, we also just, I don't know how you feel, but we have to weigh other scenarios. Like, could anybody have been around in the office then?
Mhm.
You know, I don't know what you think or
Well,
if you'd share.
could you clarify? So she had kind of disclosed that there was somebody in the realm of work that was making her uncomfortable to her mom, you said, right? Her family,
Yes, yes.
but
Just
nobody
to her
else as far as we
mom,
know.
Yeah, just to her mom and her uncle is what I saw in the research.
Gotcha. But she had never named Mr. Kipper. That is a brand
No.
new name that they only discovered after they found the planner, because that was something I was confused about.
Yeah, no, she had never shared the name Mr. Kipper with
So
anybody else in the
interesting.
office.
I mean, maybe I can see a scenario where she didn't think the name was very relevant, because the reason to share names is either because somebody already knows that person, or it's because you're planting the crumbs of like something bad might happen. This is who I'm
Yeah.
meeting. In the other scenario, you would just share the actual circumstance that you're facing. I don't know that it is all that strange, I guess, that she didn't share it with coworkers, and I'll say so because it is 1986, and I'm assuming that this was a very male-dominated office,
Mhm.
and there are a bit of politics that go into navigating the office and not wanting to look weak or being taken off certain clients or having management lose faith in you because they say, "Well, we can't send her. Like, what if something like this happens again? It's a
Mhm.
liability for us." Like, I'm imagining, because I don't think she's dumb. I think she's really smart in this regard, that she had weighed those options as to whether or not this was at the level where she should disclose it. Because at this point, it sounds like she goes to meet him, so she still wants the deal. It hasn't crossed the threshold of danger just yet.
Yeah. I actually would be curious to know how many women were in her office that she worked with, and
Me
then
too.
yeah, and the other thing that I was thinking about is that, at least from my friends that have done real estate, like, in the city, I feel like a lot of times you're not really in the office that much because 'cause you're doing showings all the time, so
Mhm.
it's also quite possible that she worked pretty independently. Because
Yeah.
I didn't see much aside from her manager about, like, close coworkers or, like, office camaraderie, like, that I just didn't
Yeah.
see that. I mean, it could have existed, but, she could have been more independently working to where she
Being a
wouldn't
real
have really
estate
shared
agent
that.
is so scary. That's
Yeah.
so scary to me. I mean, I can't be in spaces alone most times, so living alone has been a trip.
Yeah.
But I just think about real estate agents who have to go and sell homes that have been in foreclosure, homes that could have squatters or something, and they have to be the ones to open the door and do the walkthroughs.
Mhm.
And also, real estate is so different now. I mean, so much of it is happening on a database and online that you could theoretically be working from home. I think in the 80s, maybe it could have been a little more different, where there was a little more office work and office strategy
Mhm.
before you would go out and do showings. But I agree with you. I do think there might have been, it creates a bit of a disjointed element where maybe she wasn't very close with her
Yeah.
coworkers.
Ooh, you also just gave me, like, a turn to my stomach thinking about back then, like, you didn't really have, unless she had a cell phone, which is totally possible, but, like, you were going out meeting, like, basically strangers for showings and, yeah, just hoping that it was all okay most of the time, and
Mhm.
going into strange homes that you hadn't visited. I hadn't really thought about it in that context, but anyways, so officers end up going down to the address where Susie had written that she was supposed to meet this Mr. Kipper character.
Mhm.
She had written down 37 Shorolds O/S, and the O/S stands for outside the property. While another group of detectives went to Susie's apartment to see if they might uncover anything else to link them to Susie's whereabouts, uh, the previous officers had gone down to try to see if they could find anything at that address on 37 Charles Road,
Mhm.
and nothing comes of either search until later that night when they discovered Susie's company car, a white Ford Fiesta, at around 10 p.m., parked on the street somewhere completely different from the Kipper address.
Hmm.
The car that Susie had been driving was discovered a full mile and a half away from the address where they were supposed to have had their appointment. And even weirder were some of the circumstances surrounding the car. So, for example, the car was completely unlocked,
Mhm.
and her purse, which had 15 pounds of cash in it, was still sitting there on the front seat. Her keys were gone, and the driver's seat had been pushed all the way back, certainly further than Susie would have probably been pushed back had she been driving. So I think the implication, and we thought about this before, but that possibly a taller man was driving, could have been a woman, but that's certainly
Mhm.
what it looked like to investigators at first pass. So they immediately
The
swiped
ghost of Christmas
for
past, baby.
Christmas past, baby. Juicy mouth. This is when we have to do 2 passes of the, research, and I'm getting juicy. But, investigators, they immediately decide to swipe the car for fingerprints, and they don't find anything. Nothing that could point them into the direction of a potential suspect.
And just on second pass,
Yeah.
like, that is one of the strangest details, now that I'm remembering it, that there were no fingerprints in the car, because
Yeah.
it almost stands in contrast to, like, some of the details of how you said the car was found, and I guess how quickly all of this went down. Like,
Mhm.
it's maybe one thing to not notice if there are 2 people who, like, go missing in an abduction and they look like a couple or something, and maybe you
Mhm.
weren't, like, clocking it. I feel like you would notice somebody wiping a car down for fingerprints, but maybe they just thought somebody was doing a little detail clean of their car. I have no idea.
Yeah. Or unless this person, which I know we'll get to in a second, like a very well-dressed person, if they had gloves on or something, like driving gloves, very like formal looking. I have no idea, but
That's interesting.
I think that's really weird to think about two people being in a car and no fingerprints found.
Oh, none of hers either.
I mean, that's what I would assume based on, well, I guess no, you're probably right. The research probably indicates that it was just no additional fingerprints other than Susie's.
Got it, okay. Because I was gonna,
But
I guess, well, that puts it more into, like, what you're thinking. Because I was gonna say, I was like, so he had time to wipe down a car, but it could be closer to what you're saying, where maybe he had gloves on. What time of year was this? Do you remember?
this was July. It was the summer.
Got it, okay.
Yeah.
That moves my winter theory out of possibility, I suppose,
Yeah.
but that's
Well, I
fine.
was I was thinking though, I guess if the person hadn't been wearing gloves, maybe they would have wiped the entire car down to get rid of everything. So it's possible that there were no fingerprints. I should probably go
Just
back
none.
and look. But yeah, at this point, Susie's mom and dad had shown up to the scene and they really take it upon themselves to do their own sort of investigating. So they show up with their 2 dogs, which I thought this was really brilliant. They help think that the dogs will help to pick up on Susie's scent naturally.
Mhm.
And so they start calling out for her. And I think that this was just a testament to how close they were with Susie because they were not going to rest until they could get some more answers.
Mhm.
And as you can probably imagine, even though this started out helpful, they the police start saying, we need you to kind of get out of here. You're beginning to meddle in our crime scene. And I don't know. I feel like I would do something similar if it were my daughter, of course, but I can see both sides where, the they're starting to lose daylight or the sun has totally set and they're like, "Okay, we need you to get out of here. Like,
Mhm.
we've got to secure this crime scene." But I don't know how you feel about that. I know that
It can
I
go
roll
either
the
way.
county, but
Well, no, it can go either way. You don't want family coming in to disrupt a crime scene. You don't want anybody coming in to disrupt a crime scene, because whatever is subsequently found, if let's say there is a suspect who's found, some of that won't be usable in court because it was
yeah.
meddled with, because it was disrupted. So I understand that logic behind it. I also understand the feverish experience I'm sure that a family would feel in just trying to frantically find their daughter
Yeah.
in the dark. They've got family dogs on there. I get it. I understand where they're coming from. I just feel that there can be 2 things happening at once that are
Yeah.
trying to both solve the same goal.
Yeah. Totally. Well, unfortunately, things end up getting heated, and officers have to basically demand that the Lamplughs get out of their way. And as the days pass and the investigation continues, and they start gathering a lot of eyewitness statements due to the heavy media coverage of this case,
Mhm,
hundreds of calls start coming into police. And there were several accounts from witnesses that they found most credible where they had claimed to have seen Susie on the afternoon of July 28th. And while there were a couple of witnesses that saw Susie leaving the Sturgis offices, the meatiest witness accounts came from the sightings of Susie near where her appointment with Mr. Kipper would have been on Charles Road, as well as some sightings that claimed they saw her closer to where the car was eventually found.
mhm.
But one thing remains the same, that each of these eyewitnesses described separately that they saw a woman who looked just like Susie with a super well dressed, very handsome young man wearing a suit and tie. And one of the witnesses who claims to have spotted Susie and this mystery man even says that the man had a bottle of wine with ribbons tied around it.
Mhm.
And another witness, actually the next door neighbor of the house that Susie was supposedly showing to Mr. Kipper, claimed that they saw Susie and another male leaving the house at around 1 p.m. to turn up and look back at the house. Then there was another witness that claimed to have seen Susie alone at around 12:50 I guess, seemingly waiting for Mr. Kipper outside of 37 Charles Road. But perhaps most unnerving was a witness statement that came from someone walking down the road, claiming that they saw two people get into presumably Susie's company car together and
Right.
that they appeared to be having a very heated argument. But everyone that claimed to have seen this man that Susie was with was constantly saying that he was undoubtedly well dressed and a very handsome guy, probably in his mid to late 20s. And because of this consistent description, police felt pretty confident that they could get a decently accurate sketch drawn up of this Mr. Kipper character, which you'll see on the second page of our doc. So,
Mhm.
just initial thoughts about him being so young and so well dressed. And like, was it originally the person that you pictured in your head as the Mr. Kipper?
Well, I mean, on second pass of this, I can assume, or I think I assumed that it definitely was somebody who was gonna be well dressed, no matter what it was, because it's a high value real estate client in my mind, so the
Hmm.
suit and all of that didn't surprise me. The same thing that surprised me on the first pass surprises me in the second one, that he was very young, which I also don't think always reads, maybe even to the victim, that this could be somebody who is going to be dangerous. She definitely had a sense, it sounds like, from the way she described this to her family, that this was somebody who was making an unwanted advance
Yeah.
towards her. But it's possible if she thought she was really going to be in danger that she maybe wouldn't have gone to close the deal, because that's
Hmm.
the other thing. It's the wine with the ribbon.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I feel like we should talk more about the wine and the like, what does that signify? Does it signify the like close of the deal, or could it have been like an olive branch or a like, "I'm so happy to see you," like,
Mhm.
but the wine is very telling to me.
It screams celebratory, but yes, you're right. You could definitely say that he was already making advances towards her, so maybe this was just another run of the mill showing. I'm curious if they ever found this, and they definitely would have said if they did, so my thought is they didn't, but it would be interesting if maybe they had been to this home before for a showing previously, because what it told me, because you said it was 12:50 when one of the witnesses saw her standing outside of the home, presumably
Mhm.
waiting for somebody. The next witness who saw them was at 1 PM, so only 10 minutes had passed and they're already back outside of the home
I know.
looking up. So I'm assuming the showing has already happened, and that read to me as a final showing, that he's already been to this address and this was the closing showing.
Yeah, but then it's like, why go meet outside of the property? Like, I if you're not gonna go inside, like, I just didn't
No, I'm
like,
saying they did go inside.
you think they did go inside?
Well, I was unsure because I was like, if she shows up at like 12:50, but I'm gonna assume that would be strange anyway to like, yeah, I guess it would have been at 1. They're actually like arriving together at the property, because who meets at 12:50? You meet at 1.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if they actually went inside. When did they think that they were walking down the street? Was it immediately after?
I don't know, I don't have a timestamp on when the witness saw them get into the car. Just
Mhm.
they said sometime in the early afternoon.
Early afternoon.
Yeah.
That is interesting. Why would they show up and not go into the home?
Yeah.
Because if it couldn't be that kind of closing, because it's not like a key handoff or anything. There would have been a record of that, and they
Yeah.
would have had paperwork from him.
Yeah.
So now I'm thinking maybe it is actually.
That is really bizarre. Like, could it have possibly been she had shown it to him before and it was just, like, a good meetup spot for them to go and then have the bottle of wine or something? Like, it just seems really.
Well, my other question, I guess, has to do with them being seen getting into the car, and who's to say whether or not the argument was actually taking place, because that witness said they saw them having a really heated argument.
Mhm,
My follow-up question was, were they going someplace else? And I had immediately run with this theory that because I thought it was a closing deal and there was a
mhm.
bottle of wine, that maybe this was gonna be an after celebration. I'm actually wondering if they were going to a different location, possibly
That's what I
back
was thinking.
towards. I don't think they would have been going back towards the office, because from what I remembered on the map, it's in the opposite direction that the car is found from where her office was.
Yeah. I almost wonder if it's like they're going on a date somewhere else or, like, going to a park or going to have lunch together somewhere. Um,
Maybe he said, "Could you give me a ride to my car? I parked it pretty far down the street." And she's like, well, sure. Do you know which street it is? And maybe he was like, I know where it is. I can just drive your car down there. It's right down the street. And that allows
Yeah.
him to get behind the wheel, is what I'm thinking.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
And maybe it's just an but I guess that still begs the question of like, well, if the car is found like a mile down the road after that
Hmm.
scenario of like, oh, I know where it is. Let me take the keys. I'll get behind the wheel. I'll drive us there.
Yeah.
How does he then get her out of the car without anyone noticing, without her screaming, and gets her into his car or possibly even a home nearby on that street?
Yeah. The reasoning behind "let me drive," I feel like tells us something. I just don't know how we got there. If it's somebody that she doesn't already know. You know what I mean? Like, to let
That's
a
the other
stranger drive your
That's
car.
not a stranger though. That's the tricky dynamic of sales
Yeah.
positions is that as the seller, you start to do a lot of things and present with a lot of behaviors that like put them in the hot seat
Mm,
in a good way, where you're
mhm,
like, yeah, like it's company car. You want to give it a test run or something like that? Like I can
mm,
see how that conversation could have gone, even if he was the one driving it. And then she's just getting a little scared because he's a big client. She's
yeah,
25 and she's just going with the flow. Maybe he
that's
even
really
took the keys right out of her hand. I can also my mom's spiraling by me. I can also see a
That
scenario of that where he's like, "We gotta celebrate." He's like, "I am taking you out. I'm gonna buy you dinner." And she's like, "No, I really can't. Like, I've got to go somewhere tonight. I got a date with my boyfriend
Mhm,
or something." And then he takes the keys out of her hand. He's like, "I'm not taking no for an answer." And he's doing it in this kind of playful way. And she's just thinking, "Oh my God, this guy's an asshole." Like, he's like, what time is it? 37.
yeah,
She's like, "He's an asshole." She's like, I'm gonna have to deal with this and like put up with it. And I've got to like talk him down from like taking me out to dinner, having no idea that when she's getting into that car, that could be the last time she's ever going to be seen.
yeah.
He's putting it under this guise of like a playful date where he's like, "I'm not taking no for an answer. I am taking you to dinner. We are celebrating your first big sale."
Oh god, that makes me so queasy just to think about how pushy that is, and also, I mean, you hit on something, but she definitely did have a boyfriend. She had a 27-year-old boyfriend at the time whose alibi he had a credible alibi, so they looked at him, and it definitely wasn't him, but,
Mhm.
yeah, I hate thinking about oh god, I hate thinking about her being forced into, like, the passenger seat in some way and being tricked.
Well, because what do you think the argument's about? That's my question for you. Because they definitely, while they're getting into the car, it sounds like, if that witness is to be believed, they're arguing. So I'm like, what could have happened in like, I don't know, the few minutes, maybe 10 minutes before they leave the property
Yeah.
and they're getting into her car and they're yelling? What's that about?
Yeah. Well, officers also thought that, like, could it have possibly been even because listen, even if she was, like, happily with someone, could there have been some sort of affair going on? Or I think
Mm.
officers also, like, teased, could this have been a married man, even though he was young, but, like, could he have been married and they were arguing because she was, like, his mistress or something? I have no idea. I think that's kind of far-fetched personally. If I had to guess, I feel like an argument would have been her saying, "Let me out of this freaking car."
Or give me my keys if you took them
Exactly,
out of,
yeah,
yeah.
or "Give me my keys," which leads us to the other really weird component of this because, I kinda mentioned it's really just, like, all circumstantial weird things that they find with the car, but what's really interesting is they find the car parked pretty haphazardly, like, as if and some officers said that they thought it was parked haphazardly. I include a picture of it in here because I
Hmm.
personally look at it and I just think it looks like somebody that might have parallel parked, like, a little bit off the side of the road, but apparently when officers found the car, they noticed that it seemed just from the positioning like somebody could have quickly done, like, a rush job.
If it was
Um,
parked haphazardly, which it could very well be, and maybe this angle isn't like telling that story, but if it was, my question is, what other story is that telling? Does that mean that there was like an immediate stop? Like she's like fighting him or yelling at him. She's like, "Stop this goddamn car right
mhm,
now and let me out of the car."
mhm,
And he just swerves over on the side of the road. Like, what happens next is
yeah.
what I'm thinking of.
Or has he somehow have they driven up to, like, where his car is, and it's
Mhm.
like a quick, like, snag her job? Wow, that was a scenario spiral, baby.
And I'm gonna keep
We
doing it too.
I love it, I love it.
I'm gonna keep going.
You better. Now Susie's parents had a much different idea about what they thought had happened to Susie, because according to her parents, Paul and Diana Lamplugh, Running away would have been the last thing that Susie would have done, because apparently Susie had a really close group of girlfriends in London, including her flatmate. And like I mentioned, she had a boyfriend and she loved the London nightlife. And she was very much so, I guess, according to her parents and her friends, in love with her boyfriend. And they
Mm.
just didn't think that she would have been interested in running off with some older man. And her mom pleads with police that she just feels in her gut that this Mr. Kipper character might be this man that Susie had been telling her about. And she thinks that he had tricked her into meeting him. And the result in her mom's mind was that he had been stalking Susie more ferociously and then decided to abduct her that afternoon. But police were absolutely baffled as to how no one in her office had ever heard of this Mr. Kipper character. Now, like I
As
kind
am
of,
I, may I say.
yeah, same. Like I touched on earlier, the media really became obsessed with this case, and Susie's disappearance is highly publicized. She's featured within 24 hours on the London Evening Standard, which was a major newspaper outlet. And this was especially heartbreaking to me. But 2 days after her initial disappearance, Susie's mom was supposed to actually be celebrating her birthday with Susie. Susie
Mhm.
had bought them tickets to go see a show and do sort of like a little staycation at a London hotel. But instead, her mom was to spend her 50th birthday answering questions about where her daughter could have gone to BBC and journalists from other news outlets. And the next day, she and her husband went on more and more morning shows in the hopes of spreading the word about Susie's disappearance. And as painful as it was, her parents sort of welcomed the media coverage and made countless television appearances. And I've included a picture of them doing some interviews on our
Mhm.
doc, but they would go on air and they would speak directly into the camera to Susie in the hopes that she could hear them
Mm.
and they, could provide her some strength. And they said, I think this was her dad. He said, I feel she is shut up somewhere, that she is being held against her will. I feel that because she hasn't contacted us. She is a very strong, very fit lady, so she should be able to cope with most situations. They also remind Susie and her kidnapper that they were looking for her and they were not going to stop. And by the beginning of August, with all this heavy media coverage and high profile involvement from her parents, police start receiving a lot of tips, actually over 700. But unfortunately, most of them don't lead to anything substantial. The only credible tip, which I can't believe that this was the one that really got them the most to take a look at it, but it was months later in November when a group of Londoners that had been following the case very closely were vacationing off the coast of Greece. And they call into police and they say, we've spotted this couple that looks just like Susie and this sketch of this Mr. Kipper character. And sadly, this tip ends up going nowhere. I couldn't find in the research, like, if they had even sent officers out to Greece to take a look. But whatever the case, it ended up being that this couple that they had seen, it wasn't credible. And
Mhm.
sadly, it becomes this catalyst for her parents to kind of accept, like, they're probably never going to see their daughter again, because shortly after this tip comes in, her parents end up putting her apartment up for sale and they decide to try and put their energy into something a little bit more worth their while. 4 months after her disappearance, they establish a trust called the Susie Lampl Trust, and it helps to fund research and investigation for girls that they believed had found themselves in the same position as Susie. Girls that maybe had gone missing via kidnapping or a result of stalking. And that could have been where the story ends. Just, this terrible ending where we don't have much to go off of, but an established trust that's bringing hope and awareness to other young women, which, by the way, it really does. And it's still functioning today and has done a lot. It's passed like multiple acts in parliament for the
Oh,
safety of
wow.
young women. Yeah, that's the one like thing about, like, I'm trying to echo home, like, her parents are like, they became so involved and invested so quickly in this case, as they, ought to be and have every right, but they have done so much work. So I just want to like give kudos to the Lamplugh family because I think they took
Yeah.
something horrendous and really flipped it. But um, we have, speaking of flips, something is really about to change in the following year. But I just wanted to ask you, like, any initial theories that are coming to mind. I know we've like already run through scenarios of like the actual day, but um, yeah,
Here's what I can say.
yeah.
I say as if I'm a lead investigator.
Nancy, is
I'm
that
like,
you?
allow me to pull out this cork board, honey.
Yeah.
Um, Here's what it tells me, because I am still shocked that there is almost no record of this Mr. Kipper
Mhm.
character. I don't think they were very far along, actually, in the process of this real estate relationship that he was clearly developing with her. I do think that he maybe saw her through the window or knew of her through the company and poached her privately. Could have been that he found her on the street or something, asked for a business card, because I'm assuming that's how he got her phone number for both her home and her office, if he was
Mm.
allegedly calling both, as she had
Mhm.
said. So, what does that tell me about going to see that home? I had originally thought that it was a closing deal, but I'm now thinking that what might have happened and what could have insinuated the argument that people or one witness said they saw is that she shows up to the home thinking that it's, you know what, actually,
What?
I'm thinking of something now, and I don't know how this would happen, but I'm wondering if this guy, stay with me on this theory.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm with you, baby.
Crapers, stay with me as well. I'm wondering if he had poached her in the weeks before and he was like trying to like, set something up with her and maybe just like make an advance on her, not even related to real estate. Like he had just maybe found her through the company and he was like, I would love to take you out to dinner sometime. I would love to take you out to a drink. She had refused the advances. She had said, I have a boyfriend, so and so. Because the Mr. Kipper thing that she writes about, from what I remember in that journal, from what you said, is that she only writes on that day, Mr. Kipper and the address she's going to. Is it possible this guy made an appointment with her somehow through a letter or something to say, like, could we possibly meet up? I would love to see a showing for maybe this budget. My name is Mr. Kipper. Um, where would you like us to, where can we go? And maybe that's how they corresponded. She shows up, not even realizing she's meeting the same guy who had been poaching her weeks before. And he shows up with a peace offering, which is the goddamn wine with the
Mhm.
bow.
Mhm.
And that's why she's immediately like, sir, now you're interfering with like my job. Like this is a part of my day. I thought you were a client I was supposed to meet, and I do not want this. Immediately refuses the advance. And that's where the interaction comes of like, I'm not taking no for an answer. Give me those keys. And the
I'm
whole thing
fully with
unfolds.
you. I'm fully with you on that because I think it's really bizarre that the name of this guy that had been pursuing her, her mom didn't even know the name.
Hmm.
The coworkers didn't know the name because to me it kind of indicates somebody that was refusing to provide their real name because maybe this was the plan all along is to stalk, 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 and then get her in a place where they could take her.
Yeah, like a confrontation scenario where like she's gonna meet you at this place at a certain
Mhm.
hour on a certain day, and you just bombard her with
Yeah.
this wine, thinking that that's gonna do the trick, and that's why he's neatly dressed because clearly he has intentions to woo. I guess
Yeah.
seems
Yeah.
very rare that people like plan to abduct somebody when they're in like a full piece suit. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah, totally. I guess the only thing I was thinking was, like, if I'm calling the office, if I'm calling her house, like, how am I introducing myself without giving my name? But maybe
Well, that's why I'm
I'm
saying
sure
Mr.
there's ways
Kipper could be
around
a
it.
faux name. That was my whole
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
maybe she thought that whenever Mr. Kipper contacted her, that was an entirely separate person from the other guy who had been stalking her before. And she's like, well, this is a client. Mr. Kipper is a new person who's reached out to me via mail to the office. So I received a letter. I feel like they also would have found that, though.
Yeah.
For some reason, I just keep fixating on like Mr. Kipper having no real record within that office
I
except for that
know.
one journal entry, which makes it seem like she was contacted privately. And for her to go, maybe she didn't even know who she was actually meeting.
I am definitely leaning towards that too. And actually, I was almost running through a scenario where this Mr. Kipper person had called the office and said like, "Hey, I would like to meet with like Susie Lamplu. I would like her to show me the home because she was, I
But
guess,
wouldn't
sort of
somebody would
prominently
know that?
known."
Somebody would have to know that at the office, though. They would remember, "Oh, yeah, we had a Mr.
Oh,
Kipper who
that's true.
called
That's true.
in."
That's true.
I think it definitely somehow happened privately, and I don't know how that happened. Maybe they
Yeah.
called her office phone directly. and there was some strange way that she didn't recognize the voice, or maybe they sent in a letter and maybe she discarded it in like the week prior, which is why it was never found.
Yeah. Oh, God.
But something about that Mr. Kipper being an unknown name to the office tells me
Mhm.
that he never went through the proper channels to get in touch with her, or
Yeah.
somebody's not talking in the
Yeah.
office and doesn't want to be held liable.
I'm agreeing with you there for sure.
Well, that's why I'm
Oh,
on the
baby.
force.
Well, I'm about to throw you on your ass more because everything's about to sort of change in the next year. So I don't know if you've made it down to the final page yet, but that's
I have
kind of
not
where
actually. Should I?
Um as I kind of run through this, like maybe just tap your way down because I don't want to like give too much away because I pretty much have a lot on that third page that
Okay,
goes
I'll
with
wait.
this last bit of the case. But
Creepers, you do this too. You follow suit.
yes, you stay in line, baby. No, I'm just kidding. You jump around as much as you want. Now everything changes in 1987 when sadly another young woman in her 20s goes missing in London. And it's from the disappearance of a 29-year-old woman named Shirley Banks that police end up discovering information that would link them back to Susie. In October of 1987, Shirley Banks had been spending an evening shopping in Bristol, which Bristol is actually about 2 hours outside of London. But Shirley was married and her husband had been expecting her home at around 8:30 p.m. that night. And when she never showed up that evening, her husband alerted police and an investigation was underway. And after several weeks of searching, police would end up finding Shirley's car, which was a Mini Cooper Clubman, located in a garage of a man suspected of taking her. This guy named John Cannan. Now, at the shopping center that Shirley had been in, there had been multiple witness statements of this kind of creepy but like attractive looking young man that totally matched John Cannon's description. And you'll also see a picture of him in the Canva doc. And I'm going to be curious to see if you find a correlation there later. But John was sort of known to be this creep that enjoyed approaching women in public places. And the reason that police were even on John's trail and they linked him to Shirley was because he was already suspected in another string of disappearances and separate assault cases, specifically for 2 women that were located in Royal Leamington Spa and Reading, England. Am I saying that right? Maybe it's Reading, England.
For
But
some reason, I think reading is right.
Reading, England.
I don't know.
I don't know, baby.
Uh,
Let's also Royal Leamington Spa, England.
I was going to say, I was like,
too.
found at a spa?
No, that's the name. I had to look that up, though. I did look that up. It's also the name of a city. But
I would have guessed it was a spa. I'm happy to clarify. I'm so sorry.
Now, after discovering Shirley's car in John's garage, as well as her DNA in his BMW, police wondered, based on the profiles of Shirley and Suzy, who looked enough alike, they kind of fit a similar profile, young, attractive, blonde, but also his looks, because he did kind of fit the bill of a Mr. Kipper, that they decided to investigate and see if there was a possible link here. And there's photographs of John Cannan that started getting published in different media outlets. And people kind of started to really latch onto the idea that he also could possibly be this Mr. Kipper character that was linked to
Oh,
Susie's murder. Because remember, it was such a high profile case at the time.
right.
Um,
And still pretty fresh for people.
yeah, and still pretty fresh. And another super weird fact, and one that I don't think it's something that we need to read into too much, although I think a lot of people did because of how high profile this case was. But when they discover Shirley's car in John's garage, it had been not only repainted, but had been refitted with a new license plate, obviously to disguise that it was Shirley's car.
Mhm.
But the license plate read SLP 386S, which I think, again, I want to hear your thoughts on this. Like, is this a stretch? But a lot of people thought it meant Susie Lampl and then 1986 when she would have gone missing.
Maybe.
Thoughts?
It's possible.
Yeah.
My instinct says no, but we've seen abductors and serial killers do stranger things.
Yeah. I mean, I personally think it's quite a stretch. And I think from when I looked it up in the research, I think that I'm sure you experienced this when you were in London, but tabloids tend to really run with things, and that was like something that they ran over and over again. I kind of think to like keep the
Hmm.
you know
Side note:
case.
London tabloids are somehow worse than American tabloids.
They're wretched.
They actually, the worst thing I saw in a London tabloid, I think I was at was it Morrison's or something? Maybe it was Sainsbury, and I saw a tabloid, and it said some British starlet. I don't know who she was, and it said Gertrude Remings, whatever her name is, she's rotting under her dress, and I was like,
Oh God.
she's rotting under her dress. That is such a scathing and violating thing to put on a magazine. That's so foul.
It's honestly like Shakespearean.
She's rotting. What does that
Rotting.
even mean? She's
I
rotting under her dress?
That is foul and nasty. And I feel like you and I will be using that as an insult to slew
You're rotting under
people.
your dress.
Oh my God.
Welcome to the meet and
Yeah.
greet. No, but the point being is that I think, yeah, taking anything a British tabloid writes with a grain of salt is probably the smarter way that we could go about it.
Yeah. But it is kind of eerie to like see it, I guess, when you look at the pictures. Like it is kind of weird to think that it's a little odd when you take a look at it and you get like too deep into the research, too deep
It
into this
is.
case.
It's
But
spooky. I'm not
it
saying
is
that it's
spooky.
not possible, but
Yeah.
it's because I do wonder. I'm like, that was definitely like a faux license number that he made up to sort of plaster over the car to throw off the scent. But
Mhm.
those letters and those numbers didn't come from nothing. You
Right.
know,
Right.
even maybe subconsciously it came from something. So that perked my ears up a bit.
Yeah. Well, despite the license plate of it all, police were for sure on and had been on his case. And they did believe that he had the profile, the looks, and the motive to connect him to Susie's case.
Mhm.
And John had quite a history of sexual assault and rape. And like I said, pursuing women specifically in public places. And I was reading that he,
So
yeah.
he really fits this profile.
Yes. And
Whoa.
I was reading that he particularly loved to hang out, and here's where he really started to fit the profile. He would hang out in wine bars a lot, and he would bring and like prepare to have on him flowers in case there was like a pretty girl at the bar. He was a fairly good looking guy at this age. So, I mean, he had lots of charm, but there were
Mhm.
definitely like a couple of screws loose. And this all kind of began back in 1981, which was a full 5 years before Susie would go missing. But he had been sentenced to 8 years in prison for the rape of a young woman inside of a parking deck in Reading. Like I had kind of mentioned earlier, they were already had that history from him.
He must have been pretty
And
young when that happened.
yeah, I guess he would have been, yeah, God. Trying to think of his age.
Only because in the picture he looks really young. So I'm
Yeah.
like, he must have been like maybe early 20s when that happened. I would
Yeah, no, he
guess.
definitely was. He definitely was. But I need you to buckle in for this next part because
Oh my God.
he ended up getting released early from the case that took place in Reading. And when he was released was July 25th, 1986. So 3 days before Susie Lampl would go missing. Which is just hello. So John had been serving time at London, also brace yourself for this name, London's Wormwood Scrubs prison. And
That's the most London named prison that's ever existed.
it's also just so fitting, like, because he is a scrub. But when he was released in July, he was basically living for those couple of days in a hostel, which was, I guess, sort of like a halfway house,
Right.
only about a mile away from Susie's real estate office. Now, as part of the
Mhm.
deal of living in this halfway house, John could only leave during the day. And a lot is going to go down in the first several days he is living in this halfway house. And I imagine the months afterwards, since he wouldn't be caught for Shirley Banks until 1987. But I'm unsure of when, like, as to when exactly he got this job, like how quickly after he got out of the house, because we only have 3 days, but before or after Susie's disappearance. But John eventually got a job working at a prop house. So he also, during this time, I guess, went back to his old ways and he started frequenting wine bars in the daytime around this area. So much so that bartenders knew about him. He was apparently very recognizable based on his looks and his behavior. And they knew him for being the type to just really lay it on thick.
Yeah, he's
Either
got
with
a aggressive come on predator
Yes.
type.
Yes. And so police I'm laying it on thick. We get
Mhm.
it. Police feel pretty bullish about John, who was serving time in jail. He had been held for suspicions of kidnapping in Bristol as a result of the Shirley Banks case. And so they decide to sit down with him and question him about the car, the SLP license plate, and try to see if they can pull on any sort of thread with the Susie Lampl case. And so they
Mhm.
actually ask him straight up, does that license plate allude to anything? And John reportedly said, sure, it could read as initials. He was described as toying, and I think that this is where all this came from with the tabloids, but he was described as really toying with police during
Of
these initial
course.
questioning periods. Because later he then doubled back and said, no, 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 I was lying. I was just being foolish. And he really tries to change the narrative, and he ends up telling police that he bought that car, Shirley Banks's car, from a businessman out in Bristol, and it was actually that guy, the original owner of the car, that had probably killed Shirley Banks and Susie Lampl, and he was sure other women. So John was doing everything he could to really throw the scent off of himself.
He's just
But
playing games.
of course. And then something extremely strange happens. Police decide to go back to the tactic of asking John very direct lines of questioning. And after hearing this tale of the businessman in Bristol, they ask John, well, could this businessman in Bristol be you doing all of this? To which John responded, yes. So
Uh,
do they have a confession from him? Is he still messing around with him? It was super, super odd. And then he basically pulls the exact same crap and he like retracts his statement again. So
mhm.
he actually says, like the police are purposely trying to trip me up. They're trying to catch me and confuse me, even though police are
My
like, you're just
God.
confusing us. So
Yeah.
during this
What an
interview,
exhausting suspect to deal with from like an investigator standpoint. I would go nuts.
well, he ends up going nuts. He reportedly got really volatile and angry, and so they had to stop the interview because they thought that he was gonna lose it on them and get violent. So, at this point, it's pretty clear to them too that John is suffering mentally. He's not well, and they
Mhm.
decide to give him a little bit more time before they're gonna press him and do their second scheduled interview. But right before that second scheduled interview, another major break comes in the Shirley Banks case. And on Easter Sunday of 1988,
Mhm.
police find the body of Shirley Banks buried in the woods of Somerset, which is a county that's very close to Bristol, in this very spooky area. And I found a picture of it. I put it
I
in
was gonna
there.
say, I was like, is that what this picture is? I wasn't sure if
Yes.
that was like rumor or theory. They found her
No,
body.
they found her body there.
Oh,
The creepers will have this
what?
picture up, and the name of it is called Dead Woman's Ditch, which it's not named because of Shirley Banks. It was named because of like a murder that took place there in the 1700s.
That's what I thought it was like. I was like, this has to be like a creepy forest that people just
Yeah.
suspect maybe a body's buried out. They actually found her remains.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Now, remember John was held on suspected kidnapping at this point. So now he's going to be facing murder charges.
Mhm.
And as he's prepping for the Shirley Banks trial, investigators continue to really press him about Susie, hoping that he's going to start to crack under the pressure. But unfortunately, John had some really good lawyers on his side, and they do their best to
Just told
protect
him to
him.
shut up. They were like,
Yeah,
just keep your mouth
they
shut.
said, do not claim any involvement in Susie's life or her disappearance.
Oh my
And
God.
I know after his 3-week trial for the murder, kidnapping, and rape of Shirley Banks, he is convicted on all counts, as well as an additional assault charge from those prior victims. So John ends up getting 3 life sentences. And with him finally in jail, investigators decide that they're going to get their second interview where they're really going to press about Susie. And and I think that they had tried to do a couple of like quick because the other interviews that they had done at this point, they needed to focus pretty primarily on Shirley. But I think
Mhm.
this was their time where they were like, all right, set in stone, the Shirley thing is behind us. Now we're going to full bore launch into him about Susie again.
Right, right.
Um,
Because they're like, what do you have to lose at this point? You got 3
yeah,
consecutive life sentences, it sounds like.
totally.
Confess. Confess.
Yes. Yes. And it doesn't go the way that they think it's going to go. he ends up being much more relaxed. He is not quick to anger. And from what I saw, he kind of spun the interview on its head, and he starts throwing questions back at detectives and barely providing any information. And it is so frustrating to them that they ended up cutting the interview short, and they decide to turn and start interviewing people that knew John, including some of his ex-girlfriends, which we're going to touch on in a second. But actually, I wanted to just ask you, because you just brought it up, but like, do you think that they interviewed him too soon? Like, do you think they should have like let him sit with the guilt a little bit more? Because I was kind of wondering, to your point, like, what does he have to lose? Like, at this point, he might still be holding out hope that something could change. I don't know. But when I read that, I was like,
I would not let him
no.
sit with the guilt, because I don't
Okay.
think this is a person who's capable of this. I don't know that they're fully capable of processing guilt.
Yeah.
I would have gone full bad cop. I would have
Yeah.
done something that might be a little under the table, I suppose. But
hmm
no, I don't think allowing time for attorneys, for advice, for spinning story is ever a good thing. I think immediacy, we've done like hundreds of cases of these. I think immediacy is always the way to go.
hmm hmm
Always.
Catch them while they're already like on their back foot a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the opposite approach of like innocent until proven guilty. I'm like, suss them out
Yeah.
until
Yeah.
you're dead sure they're not the guy.
Yeah. Well, like I said, that they turned to some of his ex-girlfriends, and in 1990, one of his exes ends up coming forward. Her name was Gilly Page, not Gilly Hicks, Gilly
Honey.
Page. I know.
I don't know what
I
you're
was
trying
like,
to do right now.
I know. I literally was like, can I bite my tongue long enough to say it? No, it immediately came out. No. Me too. So Gilly Page ends up saying that she thinks she knows where Susie's body is actually buried. And she claimed that she and John were driving from Bristol to Birmingham in 1987. So that was still the era in which Susie's case was all over the news,
Mhm.
and that she ended up bringing it up in a conversation. And she said that at one point, John asked her if she, quote, wanted to go where Susie went, and that he also put his hands around her neck at one point and said this is how she could have died. She claimed that he then pulled the car over to the side of the road near an abandoned army base called the Norton Barracks and pointed out at the barracks, saying that Susie was in there. And Gilly took, obviously, 3 years to come forward, but she
Mhm.
also said that she had additional reasons to believe that John was involved, because apparently Kipper was a known nickname between them and their friends, because John usually wore a necktie, and I guess that's sort of a thing, like a Kipper
Yeah, they call it like a
necktie.
kipper. Yeah.
Yeah. And so police are like, whoa, this is weird. Like, maybe this Gilly girl's story is actually pretty credible. So they decide to go look at Norton Barracks, and they take pictures with their cameras, but they decide that they don't have enough to go off of to justify a full search, because this is a super vast area, and it's going to need to have a lot of
And
funds
what is it
behind
called?
it.
Norton Barracks, you said?
Norton Barracks.
Can I just take a pause and map that real quick?
Yeah, of course.
Do I spell it just like Norton Security?
Yeah.
Barracks. And how do I spell barracks?
Ton. Edward Norton. Yeah. Norton Barracks. Actually, I kind of want to see.
It's
Can I put a
in.
picture of it? I'll put a picture with it.
Wait, where did you say it was again? Like
It
what
should be
county it
like
says?
somewhere outside of Birmingham.
Is it in like Worcester
I don't know the exact
or
county.
Brook Hill Village? Maybe. Hold on.
Let's see.
I'm also like, where's Birmingham?
I'm like, I need to do. I'm trying to like.
Oh
think
yeah.
back to-
This is outside of Birmingham.
Okay.
So, and what was the name of the street that the car was found on, or where the house was? Just curious. That for Susie.
Shorolds Road. The like
Also, Shorolds Road, London. I
yeah.
just want to see how far away that is. That's a 2-hour drive.
hmm
I think maybe they met and were seen at 1 p.m. in front of that house. And then that's when the witness saw them getting into a car together and they were arguing over something. Maybe he took her keys. I think he either knocked her unconscious, knocked her out, or he could have strangled her and she's dead in the passenger seat. And then that gives us a window of maybe 2 hours, which looks like that's the distance from outside of London going up to this barracks. If he takes 2 hours to go to that remote location, discards her body there, and that puts us at around 3 p.m., He then drives back for 2 hours, and that would put us just before sundown, around like 5, maybe 5:30, where he has enough time to park the car on the original street haphazardly, gets out on foot, walks to the hostel where he can't be out unless it's daytime, and nobody's the wiser. Nobody knows what happened. Nobody saw any of like the actual strangling or the murder. And he just fully abducted a body. I think that's exactly how it happened.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty I could go with that. I mean, that seems pretty credible to me because they didn't find her until or find the car until 10 p.m. So, I mean, he had a
That's what
whole
I'm
10
thinking.
hours to execute this plan, or
There's
I guess 9, but
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's just such a I don't think I clocked that in the beginning when you were saying it, like how much time there was between like 1 to like the last witness sighting to the
yeah,
10 p.m. mark when the car is actually found. And I'm like, so much could have gone down.
yeah. I honestly, until you just put it that way, I hadn't either. That's crazy.
I mean, unless he's a good bluffer, because it sounds like he also likes to lie a little bit, would you say? Like he seems like the type
Yeah,
who he loves to play with the truth. So who's to say his
yeah,
girlfriend, who he was like spilling all of this to, he wasn't just like building a story.
yeah. And of course, I think we see this time and time again, like when witnesses come forward later on. I guess this one
Mhm.
kind of reminded me of the was it Sigrid, maybe? Um,
Yeah,
but one of the cases where the witness came, like, way later, and it was like, "Okay, well, how much of that is
I know.
improved truth in your head?" You
We've
know?
had way too many of those cases too, where a witness comes forward like 10 years after the
I
fact, and they're
know,
like, "I once saw something."
I know. At least this was only 3, but yeah, but sadly, that's kind of like the whole theme of this case. It's like a lot of
Hmm.
kind of outlandish tips that, like, police actually kinda latch onto for, like, 2 seconds because it's, like, the only thing that it's, like, something new and intriguing enough and credible enough that they think they should follow it, but
Mhm.
yeah, sadly, though, in 1993 is kinda when the next piece of information comes out about this case, and this is when Susie's parents decided to have her declared legally dead.
Mhm.
And they continue to put a ton of energy and work into her charity, the Susie Lampl Trust, which, like I was saying earlier, has really grown into be a large charity. And silver lining here, they have done so much to include the passing of the protection of a lot of harassment law. So they actually passed an act in the late 90s that makes, and I cannot believe that it was the late 90s that they had to have this passed, but it makes stalking and harassment illegal. And then they had another act
Wow.
that they passed in 1998 that required all taxi cab services to be licensed and subject to investigation by the government if needed.
Is that
Um,
not surprising? That's surprising to me that they
I
weren't before.
I know it's crazy that it all happened in the late 90s, and I'm actually curious as to why I didn't go into it because I had bigger fish to fry with this case, but
Mhm.
why that taxi cab law was passed. I wonder what case
Yeah, like
that
if
must
something
correlate
happened.
to. Yeah. Now, in the 2000s, Susie's case came up again when a chief named Jim Dickey ends up re examining Susie's disappearance as part of a cold case review. And he holds a press conference stating that they are still looking at John Cannan, who was in prison at 11 years at this point, hoping that with technological advancements that they might be able to dig deeper. And one of the first things that they noticed on further examination of the case was that the original investigation, uh, the media had really described Susie as having this dark hair, but apparently days before she had disappeared, she had dyed it blonde.
Okay, I clocked you saying that earlier because you mentioned she was blonde, and I was like, "Huh, that's funny." I was like, "She looks really dark in all these pictures." I
Yeah.
wondered why you said that.
Yeah,
Huh.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and interesting too, because you were like, "Yeah, she's got dark hair," and then I was like, "Remember that because it
Now
is important later on," because you
so much time had
it's all
passed.
full
I
circle. Yeah. And because of this fact, they end up releasing an updated picture of her in the 2000s, and
Mm.
insanely enough, again, another witness comes forward stating that back in 1986, he remembers that he was jogging around Fulham and he believes seeing that new picture of her with blonde hair that he was exiting a local park and saw a BMW come to a screeching halt right in front of him. And he said that the driver laid on the horn and he claims that he saw a woman that looked just like Susie screaming. and then the BMW zipped off. And like I mentioned earlier, John Cannan did have a BMW in the 1980s, but at this point, it's been so long that there's no way to prove that the statement is credible. And like I said, that's a theme here. Jim Dickey, though, decides in December of 2000 that he wants to reopen a search in the Norton Barracks again. And it would have been a more promising search back in the 90s. But like I said, they really couldn't allocate funds toward it. And now the
Mm.
area was a residential neighborhood. It made the type of search that he wanted to do, which involved a lot of heat mapping, more difficult. But
Mhm.
over the course of 5 days, they arranged for cadaver dogs to scour the area. They used satellite imagery to unveil, soil that might look disturbed.
Mm.
And the search is kind of big news. I mean, it's almost 20 years later, and her parents go back on TV saying that they're incredibly happy to gain, hopefully, some closure. And the media again goes nuts with this, and they start publishing stuff again about the SLP license plate. They're running stories about it. And how the numbers might lead to coordinates of Susie's location. It ends up
Mhm.
kind of becoming this media firestorm again. But unfortunately, nothing is found from the search, and
Really?
nothing. And
Not even with the
Paul,
dogs?
not even by the dogs, and the dogs always know.
I was gonna
Nothing
say, I
comes
was
of
like,
it.
that's to me that like almost cements it in a strange way where I'm like,
Yeah, it's just another dead end. And Paul Lamplugh later states that he really hopes, or he had hoped that something would come from the search that would definitely link Susie and John Cannan, stating that he just knows that John is responsible, and not having something more substantial is so incredibly frustrating.
Mhm.
However, they had to be careful though, because if they linked John to something substantial and they charged him, and then it turned out to not be credible and they lost, they would never be able to retry him, not even if more evidence appeared later on.
Mhm.
And I hate to end on this note, but in November of 2024 is when we get our last bit about this case, when John Cannan ended up passing away in jail. And I hate to say it, but it may have been a good thing, because John actually ended up having the chance to be released on parole. And at the time of his death, he was 70 years old, and his sentence had been reduced down to only 35 years. Now, sadly, Susie's mom passed in 2011, and her dad ended up passing away in 2018. But there is a positive piece here, because the trust, like I said, still lives on. And I was actually looking at it today. And as I've stated, they've been able to accomplish so much. They've prevented stalking and harassment, and they've been responsible for helping to establish one of England's national stalking hotlines that helps over 45,000 people each year. So even though the Susie Lampl case is one of those cases where it just feels like we're left with so many unanswered questions, and now we have a killer that's, a likely killer that's gone. I just want to, kind of end on a note that the perseverance of the Lamplus and the investigators that reopened the case, hope is not dead, and it might lead us closer to answers someday if we just continue to say her name. So I do think it's important to recognize and treat Susie's case as a testament to what you can do with a terrible situation, and turn it into, justice seeking in a different way, even if it's not the outcome her family hoped for. And I'll probably link something to the Susie Lampl Trust in the description below, because they really do amazing work. But I just hate that this case ends on such it's such an unknown. There's really not a lot to go on with it still.
Mhm. I mean, the show, we're definitely no strangers to like stories of the unsolved, but kind of like what you said, to your point, it is so devastating when you are so close to what you think is a finish line with a
Mhm.
very likely suspect based on
Mhm.
witness statements, based on proximity. I mean, the evidence that you shared about him is so compelling. I'd almost say it feels irrefutable that it must have been him.
Yeah.
But like what you said, this case probably will remain unsolved because he is sort of the key that unlocks the whereabouts of those remains and the confirmation of maybe what happened, maybe what ended this story. But if he dies with those secrets, we may never know.
Yeah. I really hope that they can continue to hopefully find more credible tips. Like I think that's what's so frustrating about this case to me is like surely the credible tips that I found in the research,
Mm.
I don't know if it speaks. I don't want to like throw, London police under the bus or anything, but it's kind of funny. Like each of the rabbit holes they went down are, in my opinion, the ones that I would have not spent much time on. So, and I'm sure that they've done,
Mhm.
a lot of work on this, but yeah, some of the tips and the tabloids of it all and the media firestorm around it, it just kind of seems like a lot of like pomp and circumstance and not a lot of
Mhm.
hard facts that we can go off of. But then again, maybe that's what makes it so difficult for investigators.
Yeah, like when the sense where like media doesn't always help, sometimes it can hurt where it sort of throws the scent off for a while, and that's why
Yeah.
there should always be some version of a separation. Media can be great for bringing lots of awareness to cases, but it can also impede, I think, upon investigations.
Yeah. I agree. Here, here.
Here,
Here,
baby.
here.
That was
Gavel, gavel.
wild.
How do you feel round two? Sorry.
But I mean, there was so much more towards the end. There was so
Yeah.
much more that you revealed that truthfully, towards the latter half of that, I was blind reacting. I didn't know which way that was going. And I kept
Yeah.
thinking that you might reveal that they found her at some point. But it's so devastating to hear that, any of the family push that was around this has unfortunately died with them, as has the suspected killer, but they still have no body.
Still no body. I wonder, actually, I didn't see this. I need to go back and look, but if they've gone back to Dead Woman's Ditch, even though there's no trail for Susie there, I'm just
Yeah.
curious. Like, if they found one of his other victims' bodies there, surely that's a place I would think to look.
I wonder how many other women he might have abducted or killed, if it's
Yeah.
known. I mean, because if I do think he is connected to Susie and he's never confessed to that, how many other women are in his past that he hasn't confessed to?
Mhm. Yeah, because he got an early start, like 1981, and then Susie wasn't until 86. Shirley was 87. Um,
I feel pretty firm about this. From everything
yeah.
you've shared, I feel pretty firm that it was him, and I do think that he used her car. I really
Mhm.
do.
Yeah,
And he
and
drove out.
I trust the parents' gut instinct there too about like, she wouldn't have run away and them feeling pretty
Yeah.
confident that it was him, but
It's kind of shocking to me that that was what the investigators put forward anyway in the beginning, where they're like, she ran away with somebody. And I'm like, there's so much it seems like to counter that, including
I
her mom's
know.
birthday, the tickets to the show, no real written records, that they're scouring her journals, and also leaving a record actually of like the guy who she's
Mhm.
supposedly running away with. I'm like, wouldn't that be 101? Like, don't
Yeah.
leave the trail for yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Silly.
Yeah, but maybe that's it. I really do hope that more information comes out about this though, because
Mhm.
it is so it feels very like film noir to me in a weird way, like the mysterious character and the like it just seems like there's got to be this is a real life case. There's
Yeah,
got to be more than how I kind of think it's been painted in the media as this, strange, well-dressed character. Like it's a little more serious than that.
agreed. Agreed.
Um, yeah. So that's
Heavy case, my
and that's
god.
and that's how I feel.
And that's the story
And
I
that's the
have for you
story, baby.
today. Oh, babies. Oh,
Ah,
I'm curious to hear what
babies.
the creepers are going to say about this one. I
I
think they'll have
know.
some really interesting theories about what maybe went down on that day after she left the office.
Yeah. I wanna know because I really think that you painted a theory that I can get behind with the taking her 2 hours and coming back. I'm curious if other creepers think that too.
And again, I wouldn't have pitched it unless I mapped because I don't know where anything is
Yeah.
in the UK. So I was just like, wait,
Yeah. Well,
just
we're gonna link
curious.
that map because I need a link to it after this so I can go back and follow.
I mean, truthfully, because I definitely knew I was like, the UK's not that big. I'm like, so wherever he drove, it couldn't have been more than like a few hours, I think at
Yeah.
most. So to see like in black and white, I was like, yeah, if those are the barracks where he's like telling a girlfriend, that's where I left her. And it's only 2 hours away on a map from city center
Mhm.
London. I'm like, you know what would be interesting? Oh, there's no way they could tell this. I was gonna I was gonna see if they could tell like how far that car had been driven, but they wouldn't be able to do that unless they knew what the odometer read before.
I had the same thought. And then I was like, would he have been clever enough to go get gas?
Wait a second, but that was a company car. So I almost wonder if like
Oh.
they would have a record of that. Probably not, because you probably just have to keep like gas receipts to turn in for reimbursement, I think, in
Yeah.
companies.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about that it was a company car.
Mm-hmm.
I'll follow up on that.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's an interesting detail. And again, then that's gotta exist somewhere. we gotta know if there's more about that. Yeah, but I'd be curious.
I'll call the team.
Call the team, baby. But creepers, I just want to say thank you so much for listening to that.
It was a great
1.5 times.
No, that was honestly, I felt really prepared the second time around to like really think through the mystery of this.
Yeah. And creepers, thank y'all so much for joining us for another Friday ep. And we will see you on tour, babies, some of y'all. And we'll catch you for the next one.
For now,
and we're going to say
good.
I was going to say, we're still doing this dance where it's like, wait.
I was like, where is it coming? Is it coming? Is it coming? And then you were like, we're going to see you.
Say goodbye.
Hey, good luck.
I'm on my last brain cell.
All right, guys. We'll catch you on the next one. Bye.
Bye, guys.